Hey everybody, Muhammad Jefferson here. This video is just going to be a little different. If you guys like this type of content, I'll make more videos of this style. But today, I just want to discuss the nature of freedom, and more specifically, relative and absolute freedom. Now, what is freedom? Freedom is to be without restrictions. Now, when it comes to all these different relative variants of freedom, they're all getting rid of some form of freedom in exchange for another form of freedom. So they're basically getting rid of one constraint for another constraint. Now, when it comes to freedom, the term is quite vague. There are many views of freedom. Pretty much anything can be viewed as freedom if you really think about it. There is the good old libertarian view of freedom, just being free from the tyranny of the state. Some going as far as completely abolishing the state. There is the communists' view of freedom, of being free from the tyranny of the bourgeoisie. Now you have the liberal view, the modern liberal view of freedom, of just having a democracy, to be free to have a state that has open and free elections, that protects civil rights and other liberal things. But we also have the complete opposite view of that being the view that democracy is in fact tyrannical. It is the tyranny of the mob. So basically, when it comes to democracy, you're giving up the freedom to be free from the tyranny of the mob. Now that form of freedom is basically being given up to basically be free from the tyranny of having something like a dictator or a king or whatever, essentially. You can even make an argument that slavery, in a sense, is freedom, since the slave is free from having the same responsibility that a normal citizen would have, and instead his master will take care of him. So, when it comes to all these relative forms of freedom, there is a pattern which starts to emerge. Basically, the pattern is, when it comes to each of these forms of freedom, you're giving up something in exchange for a different other form of freedom. Now, in the libertarian view of freedom, you're essentially giving up the freedom to get gibsmies from the government, and even besides that, you are giving up the freedom to be free from your desires, since many degenerate things are now going to be present within that libertarian social order. Or there's even the freedom to basically establish your own ethno-state. If you establish an ethno-state, well, you're giving up the freedom to have all these different ethnic groups within your state. Now, I could go on forever listing all these relative forms of freedom and what you're giving up. I'm pretty sure you could put all the puzzle pieces in place for each different form of freedom and what you're giving up. But is there such a thing as absolute freedom? Now, if you guys remember the definition of freedom that I gave earlier within the video, that being without constraints, and each of these different relative forms of freedom getting rid of different constraints. But there is, in fact, a being without constraints. That being the infinite, or God. Now, from the name, the infinite, you can kind of tell it's something without limits. So it is completely without constraints. There is only one absolute form of freedom, and that is God. So our only method to truly achieve freedom is to basically achieve union with the infinite. Now, one may achieve this union by destroying the ego, purifying the soul, and achieving sainthood. Now, not everyone can do this, obviously, but by conforming to that which is absolute, you are achieving absolute freedom. Now, I particularly find this view of realizing the nothingness of your existence and conforming to that which is real. I found that in multiple traditions, and even some philosophies, some ancient philosophies. For instance, when it comes to esoteric views of Islam, it is viewed that God is truly the only thing that is absolutely real, and everything else is relatively real, since everything else's existence is dependent upon God, and God is the first, and He is the last, and He shall always exist, so He is the absolute. And you also see a similar view in Hinduism when it comes to the Divine One, but also when it comes to philosophies like Taoism, you also see this. According to the Taoist doctrine, the perfect sage is he who has arrived at the central point and abides there in indissoluble union with the principle, sharing its immutability and imitating its actionless activity. He who has reached maximum emptiness shall be fixed steadfastly in response to return to one's root, to the principle, or to God. Placed at the center of the cosmic wheel, the perfect sage moves it invisibly by his mere presence, without sharing in its movement and without having to concern himself with the exercising any action whatever. Now, when it comes to all creations, they are all basically manifestations of the infinite, and now there is multiplicity when it comes to all manifestation, and thus there is chaos. Now, this multiplicity is not present within the infinite, since the infinite is one. Now, the infinite is pure actuality, so it is without change. And as the Taoist doctrine said, the perfect sage basically tries to imitate the infinite's actionless activity, since the infinite is without change.
From the Islamic perspective, it's very simple that Allah is not only the creator but the sustainer of the world. At each instant, Allah is recreating the universe. And so this rejection of this reductionist approach that we have matter as the building blocks. There is no matter. In the beginning was consciousness, in a famous essay by Dr. Nasr, in which quantum paradox actually illustrates the primacy of consciousness, that it is Allah's consciousness, that Allah is al-Musawwir, the giver of forms, is what actualizes the world at each instant. Allah is pure actuality. There is no potentiality. Otherwise there would be a change in the divine nature, which is impossible. And so Allah is pure actuality. This world is potentiality, is possibility. And only that which is actual can actualize the potential. And so Allah must be recreating the world at every instant.
So, to truly be free, one must submit to the will of the infinite and conform to the will of the infinite. Conform to the will of that which is truly real. Now, as I mentioned before when I was discussing relative freedom, one normally gives up another form of freedom for a different other form of freedom. So you could be saying, well, aren't you giving up the freedom to be a degenerate, to find this union with the Lord, or to basically give up the freedom to submit to the will of other things present within the multiplicity? Well, you're really not giving up anything. As I mentioned before, God is the only thing that is real, and everything else is just relatively real. So when you really think about it, you're not giving up anything, since you're giving up something that isn't really real compared to that which is completely real. Alright, yeah, but that's basically everything I have to say about freedom, relative and absolute freedom. If you enjoyed these types of videos, I'll make more, but thanks for watching.